Hello there, and welcome back to another Night of the Movies podcast. And in these podcasts, I talk all things movies and TV, and whatever I want, whenever I want. And in today's podcast, I am ranking all 7 Mission Impossible movies. But before I do that, I should say what I say at the start of every podcast I do, and that is, if you are watching this podcast on YouTube, hello to my viewers. But you prefer to listen to your podcast, well, you can with this one as well at Night of the Movies on Spotify. And if you are already listening to the podcast on Spotify, hello there to podcast listeners, then you can also check the podcast out visually on my YouTube channel at Night of the Movies on that platform too. Likewise, wherever you may be watching or listening to the podcast, don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed the podcast, of course, and leave me some feedback on things to improve on in future podcasts, because there's always things to improve on, and feedback is much appreciated. Also, I should say here, and people who've been following my channel recently will have a good guess as to what I'm about to say. It is still the ongoing saga of hay fever. Yes, I first spoke about my problems with hay fever a good few weeks ago on this channel now, and those problems have continued. And although my hay fever isn't that bad today, I have been sniffling throughout the day, so if I'm sniffling throughout this podcast, I do apologise. If I sound a bit bummed up in this podcast, I apologise. And if I'm not in top form, it's because I got hay fever and it makes you feel a bit under the weather. So if this podcast isn't the best, blame hay fever. But other than that, this should be a great and fun podcast to listen to and or watch. So, actually, no, I'm going to mention one other thing. One other thing just before I get into my Mission Impossible rankings. I realised the other day, and I didn't mention it in my review of Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1, my podcast on that, but I realised it the day before I recorded that I've now reached over 200 subscribers on this channel. That's a really... yeah, it's a really great moment to realise that. It's really great. So, thank you to everyone who has subscribed, and thank you to people who continue to watch these podcasts or continue to listen to them. Honestly, it means the world to me. So, yes, thank you very much, and thank you for over 200 subscribers now. Thank you all, and I suppose the best is yet to come. There we go. But anyway, let's get into my ranking of all 7 Mission Impossible movies. So a couple of things I should say off the bat here before I get into my ranking. This is just my ranking. Everyone else's will be different, and so that's what's so great about all these different rankings of all these different movies. Like when people rank the Star Wars franchise, or the Indiana Jones franchise, or the Jurassic Park franchise, or the Marvel movies, or whatever. You know, when people rank these movies, what's so great about them is so many times the ranking is different. And my ranking of the Mission Impossible movies will probably be very different to your ranking, and that's what's great about it. So, yeah, let me know your ranking in the comment section below, because I'd love to hear it. And I'd love to hear what is your favourite Mission Impossible movie, what's your least favourite, because I think we're going to have some some differing opinions, let's just say that. But at the same time, just bear in mind that what I'm saying is only my opinion. This is not the definitive ranking or anything. And also bear in mind that I like all these movies. In fact, there's some of these movies which I absolutely adore, and there's some of these movies which I like. But I don't dislike any of these films. That's the point I'm making. I think they're all really fun to watch and exciting at times. I just think some are miles better than others. And some don't have that oomph, you know what I mean? That oomph and that power and that excitement and thrill that the best Mission Impossible movies do. And so, even though I may rank a Mission Impossible movie, well, even so, I might rank one of the Mission Impossible movies at the bottom of my list, which I'm always going to do. But, you know, even though I've got Mission Impossible movies down at the bottom of my list, I still enjoy them. That's what I'm trying to say. No Mission Impossible movie I dislike. I enjoy them all, but I will be doing a ranking, and if I was going to rank all 7 Mission Impossible movies, it would go like this, from worst to best. So at number 7 on my Mission Impossible ranking is Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol, and that is the 4th film in this franchise. And I should say here, this again is not a bad movie. It has some great sequences. You know, you've got Tom Cruise back once again, and he's just so magnetic in this role as Ethan Hunt, and you have that whole sequence where the end where he's got mission accomplished, and that's so great to watch. And you have him, on the side of the building on that one, on the side of that skyscraper, should I say. God, how high was he in that film? You know, when he was on that skyscraper. It's just crazy just watching it. And there is the very end of the film, which involves Ethan's wife a little bit. I like how they incorporated Ethan's wife back into this movie, and I really enjoyed watching these characters again. And it's got a really good Michael Giacchino musical score. But the reason I think this is the quote-unquote worst Mission Impossible movie, even though I like it still quite a bit, is because of the directing. The film is directed by Brad Bird, who I don't think was really familiar with how to direct a film like this. I don't think he was totally in his element with the directing, because at times it doesn't really have that visual engagement that you get with the directing in the best Mission Impossible movies, and it feels as well, it doesn't have that same flair that the best Mission Impossible movies do. It feels flat at times and feels generic and doesn't leap off the screen like I wanted it to. Again, it's got some really good moments, but I just feel the directing was lacking in this one, and I didn't care too much about the story. Like, the mission still felt impossible. That's what you want all the Mission Impossible movies to do, hence the name of these films. You know, the mission still felt impossible, but I didn't really care about the mission at the same time. But I still enjoyed watching this movie. It has some really great moments, and yeah, I mean, if I was going to give a ranking to it, I'd probably give it a 6.5 out of 10. Yeah, 6.5 out of 10. That's what I'm going to give this movie on my ranking of Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol, because it's fun to watch. I just don't think it's great though, and I think one of the reasons for that is because it doesn't have the same flair and excitement and visual engagement in the directing as you want from a Mission Impossible movie, you know, which has particularly become the standard with the later Mission Impossible films. And number 6 on my ranking is Mission Impossible 2. Now, this would be at the bottom of most people's rankings, but I don't know if people were complaining about this movie. I enjoyed it quite a lot. I mean, it's weird, and it does feel like the odd one out of the Mission Impossible franchise, and at times it feels a bit sexy as well. I mean, that's mainly through the role of Tandy Newton, who's really good in the movie, by the way. Really young when she did the film. She looks much younger than she does nowadays. But anyway, yeah, it's got some great additions in the movie. Brendan Fraser's in it at one point, so, you know, you got all that going on, and there was some really good moments, some really great moments, particularly the bike chase sequence at the end of the film, which I thought was thrilling to watch and so exciting. And yeah, that was probably the best one of the film. That was a part of the film which really made it for me, because up to that point, I was thinking it was okay, and then I got to that point, I was going, oh no, this is good. This is what I want for a Mission Impossible movie. And the film also has its own style, something which I think Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol lacked for the most part, you know, and I think the style is because of John Woo and the way he does his directing. It feels very much like a John Woo movie, and that might be one of the reasons I enjoyed it as well, because it had its own style. Whether you like that style or not, you cannot deny that it does have its own style, this movie, and it does have its own flair. Whether that works for you or not, that's another matter entirely, but the flair is a bit weird for Mission Impossible movie, but I enjoyed it. I think the biggest problem with Mission Impossible 2, though, is the villain. I just don't find that compelling, and I think that the movie does have some dull moments, and it doesn't quite reach the heights of its predecessor. You know, what was so good about the first Mission Impossible, which will come up later in my ranking, is that it just feels like a 90s heist movie. It's got this great villain, everything's so compelling, and the story, you know, the way the story goes is clever, and the plotting, you know, you never really know where the first Mission Impossible is going, and you really, really, really like it for that reason. Mission Impossible 2, I can see where I was going from a mile away, and that's not to say I didn't enjoy that, but it does feel predictable, far more predictable than its predecessor, and, you know, the villain just isn't that good. But if I was going to give a ranking to Mission Impossible 2, you know, I did enjoy it, and I did have a good time watching it, particularly for the finale bike chase. And I think Tom Cruise did great in the movie once again, you know, bringing that magnetic force he does when he plays Ethan Hunt. And I think Tandy Newton's good in that movie. Didn't have the best chemistry, them two, but I did still enjoy them watching this film. And yeah, I'd probably say that Mission Impossible 2 is... yeah, it's a good movie, and I'm going to give it a 7 out of 10. Yeah, I liked it. I mean, not the best Mission Impossible movie by a long shot, but yeah, it's fun. And sometimes it's one of a fun movie to watch where it's going to take your mind off the day you're having. And that's what it's like for me in Mission Impossible 2. Now, at number 5 on my ranking is the newest Mission Impossible movie, Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1, which is the longest name for a film ever. I really, really enjoyed this movie, and I loved seeing it in IMAX. And one thing I didn't mention in my review is that right now I do think this is a very timely blockbuster with the AI villain, and I can see this film really breaking some box office records. I mean, I don't know if that's going to happen, but with Tom Cruise's latest movie, Top Gun Maverick, before this, that broke all kinds of box office records. I can see people who really liked that movie and who weren't really fans of the Mission Impossible franchise gravitating towards this film now because of Tom Cruise, because of the Tom Cruise factor of it all. And yeah, I mean, he is so good in this movie. I'm going to say that about all of his performances in all the Mission Impossible films, but I think in this one in particular, he's pulling off a really fantastic performance, and I think Simon Pegg is his best, and I loved the climactic train sequence in the movie, and there's so many action set pieces in the film which are just handled with so much gravitas from the director Christopher McQuarrie, but on his third time directing a Mission Impossible movie, and you wouldn't feel like it though. It doesn't feel tired in its direction. It feels just as exciting. If anything, it feels better and more excited in its direction than the previous two Mission Impossible movies that Christopher McQuarrie directed. And yeah, there's a lot in this movie that I loved. Although I didn't love the film overall, as what I said in my review, and I think that goes down to many reasons, but probably the biggest reason, I didn't find the story that engaging. I found the visuals in the film and the directing very engaging, the visual storytelling, but I just didn't find the story that compelling, and I thought it lacked that feeling of the mission being impossible. You know, one thing I didn't say about Mission Impossible 2 was that the mission does still feel impossible in that movie, and that's the same with Ghost Protocol to a certain degree. But in this movie, I didn't feel the mission was that impossible until we got to the last 40 minutes and the whole train sequence. And I won't spoil that again in case people haven't seen the film, but I won't go into spoilers there in case people haven't seen the movie. But the thing is, that whole train sequence, I was gripping the edge of my seat. It was so intense, and I loved that, and that's probably the reason that Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning gets the higher place than the last two Mission Impossible movies, I said, just because of that whole last 40 minutes, but I didn't find the story that engaging, and I do think that at almost 3 hours, it's pushing that runtime, and you feel that length, and I didn't love some of the characters as well. I mean, I really like Hayley Atwell as an actress, and I can't wait to see her in more stuff. She's one of the actresses who's got so much energy with whichever role she plays, but I just didn't think the character was that good. She's got a lot of energy, and I enjoyed watching her, but I enjoyed watching her mainly because it's her, not because of the character. And I don't know, I didn't love what they did with Rebecca Ferguson either, partly because I'm a huge Rebecca Ferguson fan, and I really love her in this franchise, and I wanted to see her do more, and, well, I was all about to give something away then, but I was disappointed with her role in this movie. But I did still really, really, really enjoy Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1. And I'm looking forward to the sequel to Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 2. And one thing I will say, by the way, is, you know, when I was watching Mission Impossible When I was watching Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1, you know, I had it in the back of my mind that this is only a Part 1, though. That's one of my problems with, like, Part 1, Part 2 movies. You know, Mission Impossible Rogue Nation and Mission Impossible Fallout feel like Part 1 and Part 2, but they're not called Part 1 and Part 2. So when I'm watching Rogue Nation, I'm not going in the back of my mind, this is only Part 1, you know, but then with this Mission Impossible movie, with Dead Reckoning, I was thinking that, and it did affect my enjoyment a little bit. Maybe when I watch Part 2 and the story is complete, I mean, the story is complete in this movie, it feels like a very complete movie, but what I mean is when this Dead Reckoning story is complete, I might like this film a lot more. I mean, there's a good chance I will, but right now, as you've only got Part 1 of the Dead Reckoning story, I just don't love it yet. But I did really enjoy it, and seeing it in IMAX was, it was a treat. And as I already said in my review of Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1, I would give this movie a 7.8 out of 10. Now, let's get on to ranking number 4 of the Mission Impossible franchise. And in fourth place is Mission Impossible Rogue Nation, the 5th Mission Impossible installment. And this movie is terrific. This might be one of the best action movies of all time. I mean, honestly, the Mission Impossible movie from now onwards, the ones I'm going to say in my ranking from now onwards in this podcast, I do think I will up there some of the best action movies of all time. I'm not saying they are the best action movies, but this would probably be my top 10, maybe top 15 action movies of all time because of how exciting and full of speed and acceleration this film was. It was a thrill ride from start to finish. My biggest issue with this movie is that it's 2 hours 40 minutes and it slightly outstays its welcome, I do think, towards its end. But there's so many moments in the film that I absolutely adored. The opera house sequence, the underwater heist sequence, followed by the bike chase, which was, I mean, just amazing. And the way that was done and how real everything felt. Because, it's all Tom Cruise doing his own stunts. And the stunt in that movie on another level. And I love the way Rogue Nation as well introduces Rebecca Ferguson's character. I love how it introduces her as this spy who we're not sure whether we can trust or not, but we think is on the side of Ethan Hawke. And again, we're not really sure. I love how it does that. And I mean, the whole movie is just action, pure action brilliance. And it's constantly moving. And it has this fantastic finale, and yeah, I mean, I loved Rogue Nation. I really had an amazing time watching it when I rewatched it for the first time in like 7 years last week. Yeah, really something else, and in my top 15 action movies of all time. And if I was going to give a rating to Mission Impossible Rogue Nation, I'd say it's an 8.3 out of 10, and it's 4th on my ranking of all 7 Mission Impossible movies. And number 3 is Mission Impossible Fallout. I think this movie came out in 2018, I want to say, or it might be 2017, I might be wrong there. But yes, this is the follow-on to Rogue Nation, and I think one of the reasons this movie is so good is because of Rogue Nation, though. Like I said before, Rogue Nation and Fallout feel very much of the same story, even to the point that you mainly have the same villain in both films. Sean Harris is the villain in both movies, and I love how creepy he is in Fallout, though. I love that he just looks so sleazy, and you really hate him. And Sean Harris plays that villain so well, and the helicopter sequence in the end of the movie. I mean, I don't know how Tom Cruise didn't die doing that. I don't know how he didn't die doing any of these stunts in the Mission Impossible films, but that helicopter sequence in particular, you have Henry Cavill as a villain in this movie, as an antagonist. He is brilliant, probably my favourite Henry Cavill performance today. I know, by the way, many people love him as Superman. I wasn't too big on him as Superman, but it's probably... And I liked him in The Witcher quite a lot as well, but I've only seen the first season of that. But this is probably my favourite Henry Cavill performance. And I love how this film reincorporated Rebecca Ferguson back into its story. It felt very natural. That you had Angela Bassett in this movie, who had so much presence every single time she was on screen. And I also loved how this film had the re-edition of Michelle Monaghan as Ethan Hunt's ex-wife, who he still has a lot of care for, who he still really, really cares for. And I love how she's incorporated into the finale, into the third act of this film, because I do think it adds another layer of suspense. And I mean, that whole third act is so suspense driven and so exciting. And I mean, the whole movie is just brilliant, and I forgot how good it was when I was rewatching it. I forgot how good it was until I rewatched it last week. Yeah, just amazing. Fallout is really, really amazing, and I think the only reason I haven't put this in my number 2 spot is because I do think the directing is... I think sometimes the film is a bit too big. That's what I was about to say. Yeah, no, I think the directing is good. I take back what I was about to say. No, I think the directing is good, but I think the film at times is a bit too big and a bit too epic. One of my issues with the Mission Impossible franchise, and something I didn't really talk about in regards to Dead Reckoning Part 1, is I do think the movies these movies are starting to get a bit too big, and I think Fallout, you get that. There's so many epic and magnificent action sequences that you can't really take it all at once. Sometimes it feels a bit too overwhelming and you want to take a breather, and sometimes it feels a bit too epic. I really hope after Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 2 that if they continue to make Mission Impossible movies, which it sounds like they're going to, they bring the franchise back down a bit back down to like the standards of Mission Impossible 3 or Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol, where it's big and it's epic, but it's not too epic for its own boots. I hope they do that instead of keep going bigger and bigger and bigger, because I do think eventually it become their downfall. I don't think it became the downfall of Mission Impossible Fallout, but for me, at times it was a bit too overwhelming because of just how grand it was, and I prefer the Mission Impossible movies which aren't as big as Fallout, although Fallout is number 3 on my ranking, so you can tell I love it. I love Rogue Nation and I love Fallout, and I feel they very much work as a nice pair. But I do think Fallout is better, but I only think one of the reasons I think Fallout is better is because Rogue Nation is so brilliant, though. If you know what I mean. If you've seen Mission Impossible movies, you'll understand what I mean there. And yeah, it's an incredible action movie, and up there is one of the best action movies of all time. Probably my top 15 favourite action movies. And so I would say that Mission Impossible Fallout is an 8.8 out of 10. Now, let's go on to number 2 on my ranking. It's the first Mission Impossible. This probably won't be that high in most people's rankings. In fact, you know, if you haven't guessed already what my number 1's going to be, that won't be number 1 for most people's rankings either. But I only saw these movies, well, I only saw the first Mission Impossible movie anyway, well, the first 3 Mission Impossible movies, that's what I was trying to say. I only saw the first 3 Mission Impossible movies for the first time last week. So I was watching the first Mission Impossible film, and I'd heard from some people that was okay. You know, it's not that good compared to the latest ones. I don't know what people are going on about. I preferred it over the latest ones, and I really like some of these latest ones. I love some of these latest Mission Impossible movies even. But I think that this one, the fact that it was directed by Brian De Palma of, you know, Carrie and Untouchables fame, made this into something that could have been just another 90s heist movie, but instead had its own style, had its own uniqueness to it, had its own flair to it, and felt so cool at the same time. I love the way this film is directed, and I love how it's just a 90s heist movie as well, and that you can tell they never intended for this film to be, you know, so if you can hear car alarm going off, by the way, you can just hear it going off right now. But anyway, I love how you watch the first Mission Impossible and you can tell that it was never meant to turn into a franchise. You can tell that with the first movie, it feels very much like its own beast, and yet I love all the heist of it. I love how impossible the mission feels. That's one thing I really love about the best Mission Impossible movies, whether it's Rogue Nation, whether it's Fallout, or whether it's the last 40 minutes of Dead Reckoning Part 1. And what you get in this movie is a mission and a heist at that which feels impossible, and a great villain, well, great set of villains at that, and a really clever story, and loads of famous actors in this one, which I didn't realise had a role in the Mission Impossible franchise, like Emilio Estevez, also Kirsten Scott Thomas, and John Voight, I think that's the actor's name, you know, the one who's in Midnight Cowboy. All these famous actors in the movie that I didn't know in here and have quite important roles, and the directing, the action sequences, and the high sequences just have so much gravitas to them that it just flows so well. And I also love the final train fight in this film, which, yes, is a bit dated now. Some of the CGI in that final train fight, I don't know if it even is CGI. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Maybe it's just special effects. But some of the effects, that's what I'm trying to say, some of the effects in the final train fight in this movie, I do think are a bit outdated. But I love this one because this felt like a classic 90s heist movie, and it also was a great start to the Mission Impossible franchise with, you know, you have the first appearance of Luther in that film. Luther is in all the Mission Impossible movies, even has a small scene in Ghost Protocol, the 4th Mission Impossible film, and you also have Kid Rich as the villain in this movie as well, who returned for the latest Mission Impossible film, Dead Reckoning Part 1. So it does set up the rest of the franchise. but it also very much feels like its own thing. And that's one of the reasons I really like the first Mission Impossible. And actually, one of the reasons I really like Mission Impossible 2 as well. You know, you can watch either of these movies having not seen the previous one. I mean, you can do that in most Mission Impossible movies, but in particular, I think you can do that a lot with the first 3 Mission Impossible films. You can watch any of the first 3 Mission Impossible movies individually, having not seen the others, and you would still get something out of them. And that's one of the reasons I enjoyed Mission Impossible 2 quite a bit, and that's one of the reasons I really loved the first Mission Impossible, because it felt like a classic. That's what it felt like, and honestly, I don't know what people's problems are with this movie. I loved it. It's so well directed, so well crafted, so well orchestrated in its action sequences, high sequences, and the mission felt impossible, and the Danny Elfman musical score as well. Such a brilliant movie, and if I was going to give a ranking to the first Mission Impossible film, I'd give it a 9 out of 10. And it's number 2 on my ranking of all 7 Mission Impossible movies. And number 1, and if you haven't guessed it already, I'll be surprised, and number 1 on my ranking of all 7 Mission Impossible films is Mission Impossible 3. Directed by J.J. Abrams, which I know, you know, J.J. Abrams, for some reason, I don't get this, but for some reason, J.J. Abrams has become somewhat of a controversial director now, because, and not because of anything he's done, because he's just made The Rise of Skywalker, and some people didn't like that, and so they're determined to dislike anything J.J. Abrams, because he didn't do the best job with the last Star Wars movie. And, you know, I agree there. I enjoyed the last Star Wars movie, Rise of Skywalker, I enjoyed it, but it's not the best Star Wars movie, but it doesn't change the fact that he's a good director, at least in my opinion. He did a great job with The Force Awakens. I loved Super 8, and I really enjoyed the Star Trek movies he directed. Yes, even Star Trek Into Darkness, which some people really don't like. I don't get that either. I think it's a really fun movie, and I love this movie though. This might be my favourite directed J.J. Abrams movie. You know, I love The Force Awakens. Great film, brilliant way to reintroduce everybody back into the Star Wars franchise. But this is my favourite director J.J. Abrams film, because he felt so... It feels like he's behind the camera and he's so excited to direct anything. Like, oh, let's get this bit, and oh, let's move the camera here, let's make this exciting. Why can we make this more exciting? Because we're going to do it in my direction. That's what it feels like. It feels like J.J. Abrams, when he came to make Mission Impossible 3, he was excited about making it. And you feel that in the film's visual engagement and storytelling and directing, which is on another level. This is one of my favourite action movies of all time. It's in my top 5. It may even be my favourite action movie of all time. Although saying that, I do think Mad Max 2, is absolutely amazing, and Mad Max Fury Road as well. Those movies are incredible. But Mission Impossible 3 was for me what I wanted a Mission Impossible movie to be. Not to say the other ones aren't, but this was the perfect one for me. I sat there, glued to the screen. I put on the film, and I thought, it's not going to be that great, so I'm going to build some Lego whilst it's on. I was building the Lego, and about 5 minutes into the movie, I was like, put the Lego down, I am watching this. I'm not catching all of it, and I want to, because of how great it is, because of how great the directing is, and because of how great Philip Seymour Hoffman is in this movie. Philip Seymour Hoffman is the villain, and man, we lost that actor too soon. It's so sad that he's passed away now, because every performance he did, whether it was in a good movie or a bad movie, you know, I didn't really like the film Owning Mahoney, but he is so good in that. You know, every single film he's in, whether it was good or bad, he was so good in every single film he was in. I still think that Philip Seymour Hoffman plays the best Mission Impossible villain in the entirety of the Mission Impossible franchise. You know, I love how menacing he is, how evil he is, and how you really don't want to mess with that character. He doesn't give a shit. Every single time he's on screen, you are watching him, he's like, oh, he doesn't care one bit about Ethan Hunt and his wife. And that's another reason I love this film, because you have Ethan Hunt and his fiancée, who he gets married to halfway through the film. You know, I love that addition to this movie, because it reminded me of On Her Majesty's Secret Service, which is my favourite James Bond film. Now, if you don't know this already, in On Her Majesty's Secret Service, James Bond gets married at the end of that film. And it's one of the reasons it's my favourite James Bond film because it adds an extra layer to the movie. It adds heart to the film. Something which I'm not saying the other Mission Impossible movies lack, but don't have as much. And I felt that really in Mission Impossible 3. I felt the heart a lot more because you had the addition of Mission Impossibles. Ethan Hunt's fiance turned wife in the film, really well played by Michelle Monaghan, and you believe in that relationship. And I love J.J. Abrams' directing style. I don't care what anyone says. I think J.J. Abrams is a good director. He's a bit of a pseudo Spielberg. You know what I mean? He's a bit of a poor man Spielberg. Although saying that, I still really enjoy his movies. They're just nowhere near good as Spielberg's, and he's good friends with Spielberg anyway. So I bet he wouldn't mind that comment. But yeah, I love J.J. Abrams' direction. This is the first Mission Impossible film that had Simon Pegg in, and I love how he's incorporated into the movie. He's not in loads of it, he's only in about 3 scenes, but I love the scenes that he's in. And the musical score by Michael Giacchino, I've been listening to it recently. Man alive, it's a good musical score. I wish we got musical scores like that for the Mission Impossible movies. Like, I didn't love Lon Balfe's score for the latest one, for Dead Reckoning Part 1, but I love Michael Giacchino's score for Mission Impossible 3. I've been listening to it on Spotify continuously recently, and I mean, my only problem with this film is that the virus that they're going after is called Rabbit's Foot, and I felt that was a bit of a weird name and a bit cringy. Every time it came up, I was like, really? That's what you're going to call it? Apart from that, though, I loved Mission Impossible 3, and it's epic, but about as epic as a Mission Impossible movie needs to be. If they ever need to tone down the Mission Impossible franchise, I'd recommend they tone it back down to Mission Impossible 3 in terms of its scale, because I love the stunts in this film. I love how it's constantly moving. It never has a dull moment. I mean, I'm not saying, that I think all the movies Rogue Nation, Fallout, the first Mission Impossible, and this Mission Impossible 3, don't have dull moments whatsoever. But Mission Impossible 3 is constantly moving, it's constantly exciting, it's a thrill ride, and it's a proper blockbuster. It's a proper movie. I loved it from start to finish. Absolutely loved Mission Impossible 3. It's a proper popcorn flick, and for me, it's one of the best action movies of all time. And I can see why some people wouldn't like it, because, it was dated 2006, and some people might say the directing is a bit dated. I completely disagree, but I can see why some people might say that. But for me, the directing had its own style, and it had its own flair. That didn't feel like it was, depending on a previous film's direction. Like, it didn't feel like it was depending on Mission Impossible's 2 direction. It felt like it was its own beast. And much like Mission Impossible 2, and much like the first Mission Impossible, it's a Mission Impossible film you can watch having not seen the others, and you would understand it. You would understand this movie, and I loved how you had Ethan Hunt getting married in this film, and that was, for me, which really sealed the deal. I mean, Philip Seymour Hoffman is incredible, and Tom Cruise, I think, gives his best performance in Mission Impossible 3, and yeah, I loved how it was suspense driven, but also emotionally driven as well. And so for me, the best Mission Impossible movie is Mission Impossible 3. So let's just go back over my rankings. At number 7, again, I don't think any of the movies are bad. This is the way I've ranked them. At number 7 is Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol. At number 6, for me, was Mission Impossible 2. At number 5 was Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1. This is again from worst to best. At number 4 was Mission Impossible Rogue Nation. At number 3 was Mission Impossible Fallout. At number 2 was the first Mission Impossible. And at number 1 for me was Mission Impossible 3, and I haven't given a ranking to Mission Impossible 3 yet, so I'm just going to do that. All in all, I'd say the Mission Impossible 3 is a 9.5 out of 10. I give a ranking to all the other Mission Impossible movies, but I forgot to do Mission Impossible 3 when I just talked about it. But, like I said before, it's a proper movie, and I would give it a 9.5 out of 10. I would give Mission Impossible 3 a 9.5 out of 10 from me. And that's my ranking of all 7 Mission Impossible films. Goes from, let's see if I can remember off the top of my head, Ghost Protocol, Mission Impossible 2, I'm getting a bit stuck here, Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1, Mission Impossible Rogue Nation, Mission Impossible Fallout, the first Mission Impossible, and a Mission Impossible 3. That's my ranking of all 7 Mission Impossible movies. And let me know yours in the comment section below, because I'd love to hear it. Anyway, guys, that is it for this podcast today. Thank you, as always, for watching or listening. And if you haven't yet, please do click down below and like, subscribe on this podcast, and look forward to many more podcasts coming very, very soon on this channel. Thank you as always for watching or listening, and I will see you guys again soon, but bye for now. Bye!